share a short word to you this morning out of the book of Esther. I want to share it to you as I received it. And you know what? Just tell the guy next to you, relax. It doesn't always have to be the same. Just so that he can breathe and know there's nothing sinister that's going to take place. In the book of Esther, we read about Esther. Surprise, surprise. We read a story about a Jewish girl that in a time of exile to one of the most ruthless kings in history. And you can go read about King Xerxes. Very, very ruthless king. But in a time of exile, in a very bad situation, found herself not only in a bad situation, being in exile, being a Jew, being hated by just about everybody around you, but she found herself in a time where the king got angry with what his wife did. His Queen Vashti, didn't want to come and dance for him and his drunk friends. When they were having a festival, she was having a banquet of her own, and he basically sent some slaves over and said, listen, go tell her she's got to dress up and come and dance in front of us. I want to present her beauty. Now, she didn't want to come, and the king just said, okay, listen, you're not queen anymore. But after that, the King Xerxes, it said that he was thinking about Vashti, was alone. And his advisors gave him advice to go and get a few beautiful young girls from all over his kingdom, 127 provinces that he was governing at that stage. And they said to him, go get these young girls, and we'll get the most beautiful ones, the ones that we think you will like, and we'll bring them all into your harem. And these girls were prepared for 12 months. First 6 months, they spent time with what they called beauty oil treatments, and then beauty treatments, and all kinds of spices and stuff. You can go read it up. Just it was extravagant. If it takes 12 months to prepare you, that's extravagant. Yes. Some of the men going, phew, thought I was waiting a long time. For these girls to be prepared to be with the king. And then, when they were invited to the king's chambers, they could take whatever they want with. They could choose whatever they want to take with them. And it says that Esther, in this time, was taken to this harem. Exiled, one of the most ruthless kings, a young girl. But what you must remember is Esther's this is not just the situation, she also, as a young girl, lost her mom and her dad. So she had nothing and no one. But her cousin saw what happened to his uncle and his aunt, and he took Esther in and he took care of her, and he raised her as his own. And when the time came for Xerxes' men to come and collect these young girls, you find Esther's uncle, or Esther's cousin, who raised his uncle's daughter as his own. You find him not at his home. You find Mordecai at the gate of the palace, praying for Esther. You see, I want to talk to you this morning just in short that in the center of the book of Esther, there's a scripture that we all quote, and even when they make movies about it, they put the theme on the movie of Esther, for such a time as this. Yes? Because that verse that says this is in chapter 4 of Esther. And it's actually not Esther saying those words. Those words come from the man that raised Esther. Not his own daughter, his uncle's daughter. He raised her. He sat at the gate praying for her, giving her advice, always being there for her. So much so that while he was sitting at the gate, two of the king's men were plotting to kill the king. And while they were conspiring to kill the king, in chapter 2 of Esther, Mordecai overhears this. And he shares that with the king's officials, and they investigate it, and in the end, the king's life is saved. These two men, because of the ruthlessness of Xerxes, are impaled in front of the public. They are made an example of, and Mordecai saves the king that has him as a slave, and took the daughter of his uncle that he raised out of her home into his harem. Can you see the picture? He hears a conspiracy about this ruthless king, and he opens it up. I can imagine what I would feel like if I was in the same situation and my daughter, the one that I've raised in my home, were taken to the king's harem, a king like Xerxes. I could imagine what I would have done hearing that. But Mordecai walks on a different path. He acts by a different set of rules. Mordecai chooses there to do what is right in his heart, following the one that instructs him at the king's gate, following the one that instructed him to take in his uncle's daughter. Because you see, a queen is not made in a year. It takes longer than that. A queen is not made with oil and myrrh and beauty preparations. A queen is sometimes not even made in our own home. A queen is made by somebody that loves God enough to even take care of a daughter that is not his own, in such a way to guide her, to lead her, to instruct her, that when the king's men wants to find somebody beautiful, somebody good, Esther stood out. A queen is made moment by moment in her house. A queen is made by Mordecai walking alongside her, guiding her, showing her, leading her, showing her what integrity is, showing her what it means to follow God, showing what it means to listen to the voice of your God. A queen is not made in the palace. God's kind of queen might be found in a simple home, being made, being formed, being instructed, being guided by a godly man, raising her. She stood out so much that in this harem, the ones that should take care of her, his name is, his name left me. Let me just quickly get there. When Esther was taken to the palace, she came before the king's servant. Can you believe me? I cannot get his name now. Here we go. Esther did not reveal her nation's a nationality and a family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day, Mordecai walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what had happened to her. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months. Now he was walking there in front, and the servant that took care of Esther put her in the best place of the harem. His name was Haggai. He put her in the best place of the harem because she found favor with him, not just in her beauty. And when her time came to go to the king was so pleased with her that Esther was not part of the harem anymore. She became queen. It said that the king loved her so much. The king was attracted to Esther, verse 17 of chapter 2, more than any other woman. She won over his favor, his approval, more than any other of the virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head, made her queen instead of Vashti, and the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberty. She was so beautiful that the nation, 127 provinces, had a holiday because of how much the king liked Esther. Talk about an impressive performance. Talk about beauty, outwardly and inwardly. And Mordecai stayed at the gate, saved the king's life. And then, as always, things turned a bit. One of the king's leaders, his second in charge, Haman, wanted to annihilate and wanted to take care of Mordecai sitting at the gate. You know why? Haman was raised to be second only to the king. And because of that, everybody else, when Haman came out of the palace, would bow before him. But Mordecai would not. And when they asked him, why don't you bow before Haman? He said, I'm a Jew. We have a God. We bow before him and him alone. Now, because of that, Haman was so displeased that he said, listen, I've got to kill this Mordecai. But he was so angry that he didn't just want to kill Mordecai. He actually said, to teach him a lesson, to teach them a lesson, I'm going to kill all the Jews. And on the 13th day of the first month, Haman asked the king, say, listen, give me 12 months to prepare because there's people in your kingdom that do not abide by your rules. Give me the authority to kill all of them. The king gave him his signet ring and said, Haman, you make the law, put my seal on it, and it will be so. And Haman did that. When Mordecai heard this, in chapter 4, he actually came to the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes. He wailed throughout the city. Esther heard this, that she sent message to Mordecai. She said, listen, take him these clothes so that he can dress. Mordecai sent them back and said, you tell her, I will not dress with these clothes. I'm in sackcloth and ashes for my people. And then Mordecai sent message to Esther, said, listen, you've got to go and plead for our lives with the king. This is the center of the story when Mordecai in chapter 4 sent word back to, when Esther sent back the word to Mordecai saying to him, Hatak went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said, verse 9 of chapter 4. Then she instructed him to say this to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of royal palaces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner courts without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Esther said to Mordecai, if I go, I will die. Listen to Mordecai's response. Esther was raised by Mordecai. Mordecai was saying, plead for our lives with the king. And Esther said, listen, I'm going to die if I do. Mordecai's response was this, Esther, if you do not do this, God will still save his people. God will still save his people, but you will lose your life. He says, but maybe it's for such a time as this that you are in the palace. What Esther didn't understand was that Mordecai was saying, maybe it's for such a time as this that I saw when your mom and dad died, that I had to take you in my home and raise you as my own. I could see you as special. I could see God had a plan. I did not know what the plan was, but maybe it's for such a time as this that we fed you and clothed you. Maybe it was for such a time as this that every moment you asked me what to do, I listened to Him when I instructed you. Maybe it's for such a time as this. I don't know, but Esther, now it's time for you to decide what to do with your moment. Moments by moment, I have led you to this point. Now you've got to stand and decide, who are you going to listen to? Esther sent back to Mordecai. She said, then ask all the Jews to pray with me. Fast, don't eat, don't drink. Fast with me for 3 days. We'll do the same thing, and then I will go to the king. And after 3 days of fasting, Esther went to the king. And the moment she stepped in, the king pointed his scepter at her, saving her life. But he said this. He was so pleased with Esther. He said, listen, man, if you ask me anything, I will give it to you, in even half my kingdom. He repeated it twice. Shorten the story a little bit. You can go read it, and I hope you do. Esther said to the king, all that I want is you come to a banquet that I will give to you. And the king came to a banquet. She said, but bring your 2IC along. Haman, bring him along. Now, Haman was very pleased. Remember, Haman just the day before saw Mordecai again standing when everybody is bowing, and he was so angry. And his wife and his advisors told him, don't you worry. You are so elevated in the kingdom. Don't you worry. Just put up a pole. We're going to impale Mordecai in your area, in your backyard. You're going to impale him, showing people what authority you have. And here Mordecai returned, Haman returned to his family saying, listen, this is what the king asked of me. Now the king has given me his ring to do this, but now the king has even invited me to a banquet with Esther. He felt like the most important man. And he knows he's got the Jews that's going to die on the 13th of the last month. They're going to die, planning it for 12 months. He knows this is ahead. Mordecai still didn't bow. And it says, and Haman was so angry because Mordecai wasn't even afraid. He knew he's God. So this is how this story plays out. The king said to Esther, listen, what do you want? Even half my kingdom, you can have it. In short, Esther said to the king, she said, I just want my life and the life of my people. And the king said, who did that? She said, my people are going to be killed, all of them. She even said, if they were sold as slaves, every one of them, woman and child, I wouldn't even have bothered you, because it's not worth bothering you for. But every one of us is going to be killed. And the king asked, who did that? And she said, it's this vile Haman sitting next to you. The king walked out. He was so angry. Haman tried to plead with Esther. When the king came back in, Haman was trying to plead with Esther, and he was so close to Esther that the king thought he was trying to do harm to Esther. And the king said, would you, in my presence, would you treat my wife like that? And Haman was impaled in the post that he made for Mordecai. You see, we miss moments sometimes. Because no matter who plots what against what God has established and against what God is doing, no matter who thinks that they can plan for 12 months to annihilate every dream, every plan, every purpose that God has for you, I want to share with you this morning, your God, the things that He said, He will sustain. But I want to remind you that Esther's story wasn't made in the palace. Esther's story was made moment by moment by moment to bring her to a place where she could make the right decision when she said, listen, then I'll go to the king if you pray for me. If I die, I die. Now we're going to ask ourselves this morning, in what part of this story are we? We would love to find ourselves, or not love, but when we read a story like this, we would think, for us, God is speaking to us. We might be in the palace. God is saying to us, for such a time as this, I'm going to raise you up. I'm going to put you in that place. But it's not you and me directing the story of our lives. It's not you and me determining, are we in the palace, are we Esther, or are we Mordecai? Mordecai did not know the story was going to end the way it ended. But he knew God was faithful. Let me ask you this morning, if you are to be Mordecai for the Esthers and the Daniels, and the Shadrachs and the Meshachs and the Abednegos growing up in your home, let me ask you, when their moment is coming, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years from now, when their moment is coming to ask, maybe it's for a time such as this, that you are in this business, that you are in this position, that you are in this political stance, that you are in this moment, that you have this decision. Let me ask you, what are we doing with the moments we have today, raising the Esthers and the Daniels that are growing up in our homes? We would love to be in the groundbreaking moments of kingdom history. But in a time of exile, in a time where we are stripped of privileges and freedoms, if we fall into the trap of living like Xerxes' men, of doing the way Haman wants things done, acting like all the other tribes, we will slot in, but we will lose the preparation moments. You might not find yourself in the palace. You might find yourself responsible for raising your uncle's daughter, or raising a child of your neighbor that comes to Christ, or speaking into young people in our day and in our time. I don't know what kind of a moment this is, but I know this is something the Lord dropped in my spirit. We better be faithful with every moment so that we can see what God wants done. God does what God wants to do, when and how He wants to do it. But it's going to be up to you and me. Say, Lord, I want to be faithful, even if it means helping to save an unrighteous king, because this is what we do. I'm going to remain righteous. I'm going to keep doing what you've called me to do in these times, in these moments. Can I ask that we sing this chorus, You Are Worthy? And then you ask yourself, what is the Spirit saying to you? What is God saying to you? Are you in the palace? Or are you maybe responsible to sit at the gate? To remain faithful to what God wants and is busy doing. Can we sing that? You are worthy.
You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. My glorious God.
Yes, Lord, you are worthy.
You are worthy.
Oh, Lord,
You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy. You are worthy.
my
Glorious
I end with this. You know what happened to Mordecai? Just before, actually the day that Haman established the pole in his backyard to take care of Mordecai, the king couldn't sleep. While the king couldn't sleep, he said, bring me the books, our historical books. And he read it. And he found a story there that somebody saved his life a few years ago. Can you think of that night? What a coincidence that he couldn't sleep that night. What a coincidence that he read that portion of history that night. Man, it's such a coincidence. And the king asked, he says, what was done to this man? What Mordecai? What was done to him? No, nothing, king. And he really couldn't sleep because it was already morning. And the king said, but something should be done to this man. We should celebrate this guy. And at that moment, Haman came into the palace. And the king called Haman and said, Haman, come here. What can I do to a man that I want to honor? What should be done to a man that the king wants to honor? Now, Haman, thinking the king was talking about him, Haman said this. Now, Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden on, one with royal crest placed on his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for a man the king delights to honor. And then in verse 10 of chapter 6, the king said this, now go at once, the king commanded Haman, get the robe and the horse, do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe, got the horses, put Mordecai on the horse, and walked throughout the whole city saying, this is what is done to a man that that the king wants to honor. What a coincidence. I had a good friend that always said to me, man, if you don't believe in God's structuring and planning and provision, you will have too much coincidence to explain. So good luck. Now, can I ask you to remember this? The making of a queen starts in a simple home. The making of a king starts in a simple home. Can I ask you, please, as you go out this morning, I know we're finished a little earlier. We've got more than enough time. As you go out this morning, just think a little bit of what it is that God has for you in the moments you are in now. All right? God bless you. Thank you for the privilege of sharing what the Lord shared with me.